So the new engine's on the hoist. And I think I've done as much as I can do with it off or on the engine stand. Remove it from the engine stand. Take care of installing the flywheel, clutch, pressure plate, and put it in place. That was the plate that was on the BP, your new engine. I took the plate that was on the old engine and reused it. Everything lines up. I believe this plate is better suited to the transmission that came on the car, which I think is an F transmission, as opposed to this, which would have had an automatic transmission, given that it was a torque converter that was bolted to the flex plate. I'm going to bolt a flywheel on there. So the only thing that's kind of interesting is there's a pinhole here, and neither the flex plate nor the flywheel have a pin to go in there. So I don't think it really matters as long as the holes line up. So that's what we're going to do. Put it on in there. So impact wrench got those bolts on there. I've now got a clutch alignment tool, and then that just slides on there nicely. Now I have the pressure plate that will bolt on and be aligned with all of that. Alright, they call it the clutch cover, I'll call it the pressure plate. It's on. Each of the bolts around the outside was torqued to 19 foot-pounds, which is the halfway equivalent of metric halfway out of the manual. Time to bolt on the transmission. Decided I would take the time to clean up the transmission before bolting it back onto the engine. So out in the driveway with scrub brush and purple power in a garden sprayer. It's not completely clean, but it's a lot better than before I rolled it out there. So I'm going to let this sit and dry and then come back and bolt it to the engine. And then put it in the engine compartment. Transmission's bolted onto the engine. And so we've got bolts up there, bolts coming in from the back. Seems to be a number of holes that aren't getting anything, but enough of them lined up that I feel confident in what we're dealing with. What I don't feel confident with, sadly, is this little mid shaft here. If I have it so that the bolt holes line up, this, by the way, is off of the 1.6 engine. If I have those bolt holes line up, then there's a big gap here where it enters the transmission. So it appears that the BP, because it's slightly longer, has a different shaft, and this engine did not have that shaft when I bought it. So because I can access this area from underneath, I'm going to continue to install the engine, see what else I come upon. I'm going to have to find a replacement for that from, hopefully somebody's got a BP that they'll be willing to sell me that part. Well, it's in. We've got that engine mount snugged up, and that engine mount snugged up. So now, more fun. Trying to get everything plugged in. Alright, where do we begin? Well, this is the harness that goes under and behind the engine. I'm going to start by feeding that down through there and hooking that up from underneath. My intent, given the fact that I don't have the right drive shaft piece on the rear of the engine, is to just see if I can get it to run. And in order to do that, in addition to oil in the engine, transmission oil in the trans, and all of the electrical hookups done, and the fuel hookups. And I'm not going to put coolant in Again, just wanted to see if it'll run. It doesn't need to have coolant in order to do that. So the other thing I've done is I have pulled up my video that I just uploaded to YouTube that went through the entire disassembly. So in addition to having the manual, I'll work backwards through my video. All right, slight change of plans. It appeared that the most difficult thing to figure out how I was going to route it, strangely enough, is that clutch line. And when it's all in place, it just looks like it's in a very, that support is just in a very strange spot at an angle like that. But that's where it wants to be. All right, so connected to that is the support for cables. And yeah, these cables here. So I can plug these in to where they need to go, either on the distributor, the fuel rail, or the intake side there. And that should give me an idea as to where this bundle needs to lay. And then that hopefully will give me something to bolt to there. Some other differences I'm finding is that on the 1.6 there's a threaded boss right above the thermostat housing, and I don't believe, I don't see one here. Oh, I take that back. So that threaded boss is that, so ignore that. Anyway, what I was struggling with was finding where this bracket goes, which connects to the back side of here. So I'm hoping that once I get this in the right place, then that will tell me where this has to go. All right, well, something else to go over. The fuel lines, inlet and out, are connected. The heater hoses are connected. The clamps are now in place. The clutch slave cylinder is lightly screwed to where it belongs. It doesn't have the rod in yet. And so we'll continue on from here and figure out where things need to go. So remember how I thought that bracket went at a weird angle? Well, it just so happens that there was a threaded hole in the transmission on that weird angle. So that is now in place. All these connections have been made. There's the top of that thermostat housing is a screw that I had to take off to install that bracket that holds this part of the harness in place. And we're still moving along as to where things go. I guess now is the time to go ahead and go underneath and try installing stuff down under there. Alright, so there is, right out there, a stud sticking out, and onto that stud goes this bar. Well, it will only go on that bar if you don't jam it up into this cavity over here. Anyway, so that would explain why I had to get the hoist back out, why I had to remove this engine mount, why I had to lower and shove this end of the engine forward so that I could get that stabilizing bar, rod, whatever, loose from where I had jammed it. So even though things slid in quite well, you gotta look for every possible issue. Fortunately, I didn't have to undo anything. There's enough flexibility in the cables and the wires. There's always going to be something frustrating, and there are two tiny streams of transmission oil dribbling out, and I don't know how that can be. So that big puddle came from me putting in about 2 3/4 quarts, which is supposedly less than the capacity, and that was an empty transmission as far as I could tell when I put it back on. It had thoroughly drained, and maybe there was some caught anywhere. So I let everything settle. I looked, the level is still below the gear. I put the funnel, jammed it on back through in there. It goes into the hole where the speedometer sensor is, and I jammed it in there, and I squirted in maybe less than a cup, and out it comes dribbling. So we'll let it settle again, pull the funnel out of the way, and see if the level got any higher. Radiator's dropped in because that was easy, and then this retainer plate holds it in place, and then I zip tied this cable harness or wire that goes all the way across and plugged in the fan powering controllers. Now I'm going to move and screwed the air cleaner base in. So this is all to get this inlet side done so that I can plug in the MAF and have a better chance of the engine starting on the first try. So we'll keep going. I got a little ahead of myself, so it's always easier the second time around. Before I could put any of this air cleaner stuff on, I needed to put the overflow coolant because there's a screw down in there and back in there, and it's easier when that's out of the way. So all this other stuff had to come out. Plus, I wanted to run the overflow hose underneath here. So the next thing I'm up to is to install the rest of the intake. But before I do that, I need to get all of this plugged in because that covers up a lot of it. Struggling with where this ground wire is going to go. I think I'm going to take it to underneath a nut right there. I'm still also trying to figure out what the heck. I've got that female connector end. I've got that male, which looks like they fit, but it's not long enough. I can't get them to come together. Then strangely enough, I also have this, which is also a 3-wire female, but this just seems to want to lay facing this way and doesn't really want to bend back in order to mate with this. So need to do some more research and see if I'm missing something that's supposed to plug. This is supposed to plug in that's hidden underneath. Yeah, we'll look a little harder here before we get too carried away. Maybe get a light out. All right, I'm 95% positive that that is supposed to plug in there, and that the issue is that end is much further down and away on this BP engine than it is on the B6 engine. So it looks like I'll have to splice in, sorry for the finger there, splice in some added length, probably on the O2 sensor wire harness. Being I had to cut that one anyway, I'll go back in where it was spliced. Now, that means I have to figure out what goes on with this guy. So in looking at the B6 here, this, which I think is the EGR valve, and we'll verify that, has got the three-prong plug to it. So when I come over here and look back in there, lo and behold, there is a 3-prong plug right there on some plastic valve looking thing that screws to the intake. So the question is, definitely can't get that to go on under there. So a little bit more research is in order before I get too carried away. Now, if that's just the EGR circuit, I can run without that for the time being and just plug everything else up. And if I get a code, then that's the only code, I'll be happy. Oh, one other thing I did is I bought some of these little plugs, cap plugs, to take care of the extra vacuum ports. And I ran a new hose here to get to the power brake booster. This is pointing down, whereas on the B6 it's pointing up. So we needed to get rid of the old hose and put a longer, more flexible one on there. It feels a little pinched at this turn, but since it's a vacuum hose, well, we'll see. Should still hold vacuum. It's not like it's flowing a lot. All right, so we'll get everything, like I said, plugged back in here. We're going to extend the O2 sensor line so we can finish plugging that in, and then that will allow me to get the air cleaner system and the intake system fully plumbed. O2 sensor wire is extended, zip tied off there, plugged in there, and zip tied off there to keep it off of the hot pipe. So a couple more things to plug in, and I will put the rest of the air cleaner on. This is the driver's side CV axle. That is a replacement boot, about a universal one. I hate the metal rings because I don't have the right tool. Anyway, that is the side that I just reused the boot. It was fine. The zip ties are much friendlier. So anyway, that's all back together. The way I had to do it, this ring is locked on here. So you end up snipping this, snipping that, pulling the boot back off of this hub piece here. That hub piece will slide off. There's a snap ring on the end of this shaft that holds they call it a tripod. It's got 3 ball bearings on it. Take that off, the tripod comes off, the boot comes off, this boot comes off, new boot goes back on, etc. So that's done. In the meantime, I also put the long shaft. In a previous clip, I discussed how that mid shaft was not the correct part for the BP engine. After some help from some nice people on Facebook, I came to the conclusion that I needed to purchase a longer 3-foot long CV axle that goes on a number of Mazda cars, and it was the right length, it had the right spline, and so what you see on the picture here is what I got on Amazon to fix my problem. Running down, there's the brand new CV axle going all the way into the transaxle and into the hub. There's part of it there. So again, this was ordered as the single 35.5-inch long one for the 91 to I think 94, 95. So the driver's side drive shaft is in, tie rod is connected, brake caliper, etc. are all bolted on, and I move to the other side. So here, like I said in the previous clip, we've got the extra long CV axle on. Tie rod is on. Oh yeah, on both sides the ball joint bolt is in. Now what I'm struggling with here, let's see if I can, right where there, that drag link is touching the shaft. Now I'm going to jack up this wheel till the weight is off of the jack stand, and we'll take a look again. All right, so there's a gap through there now, and it's the more that the weight gets on that, the larger that gap will be, but it's pretty darn close. And if we, in turning, and there's less weight on this side, it could very well come in contact with the shaft. I have to figure out how I'm going to deal with that drag link. It may get better when I have weight up off the other side, so I'll try that now. The weight is off both of the frame pieces now and just on the suspension, and we've got a better gap now. So it'll be one of those things that I watch. I'll drive it aggressively and see if there are any marks on the shaft from it rubbing up against that link. The other day, when I was hooking up everything, the old fuel rail harness, as I pointed out before, has a couple of extra connectors here, unterminated. Actually has 3. I'm only working on 2 so far. And those would be the 2 that go here, and this being the old engine. So if I look here, that is the EGR solenoid valve vent and EGR solenoid valve vacuum. And there is, I can't find it on the new engine where that would be. I don't have a manual, so I'm going to do a little more searching for that. But playing into that is this vacuum chamber, which is up here. So vacuum comes off of the intake manifold through the chamber where it's held, and then provides constant vacuum into this mass of switches. And here, things are slightly different. We've got a vacuum line coming off the intake up here. Got another port up here that we can consider using. So just still doing a little more hunting around as to what I'm dealing with. But the plan is to take this switch off of here, take it off of the old engine and somehow mount it on the new one, as well as the canister, which already has a clip back there to hold it. Now the other thing I think I mentioned before that I'm dealing with, and that is that the plug for the EGR valve, right in between those. And this is the plug that is supposed to go to it. At least it did on the old engine, where the EGR valve was sitting out here, and now it's over there. So got 2 issues. First issue is that plug, or that receptacle, I don't believe looks like this receptacle back in there. So back up in there, kind of right down in through there, is where this came out of. This came out of. This is the EGR valve off of the, that face there. This is the one off of the Kia, off the new engine. Here is the one off of the old engine, and note that there is a vacuum line running to it, and there was not a vacuum line running to the other one. But this one has a 6-pin connection on it, and this one has a 3, so the harness matches that one. Alright, so there's the EGR valve, there's the connector, and I don't know if you can see it, but I saw it when I was working in there, was the vacuum connection that goes straight into the intake manifold. So I will plug that one, reuse the one that's on the EGR valve, but then that also means that I need to use this EGR vacuum setup on the new engine. So it's coming out. So we have vacuum, sorry about the light, vacuum coming off of the intake manifold going to the switch, vacuum going to the canister, vacuum going to the canister, canister going down to the switches. We'll try to replicate all that. Alright, hopefully this can be seen. So this goes to the EGR valve. This goes to the intake manifold. This, I believe, is part of the V-Riz. So, if we trace this back, the one that goes to the EGR valve is the top tube. Take the top tube, follow it back. There is these two valves here. This needs to get moved to the new engine. So, where does the other one that goes? There's many that go into here. So the top one goes to the EGR valve. That's outside. This one is just a jumper between valves. This is the supply for vacuum. This one here is the one that feeds all the way to the intake. I believe that is the extent of what we have here. All right, so let's move this over to the new engine, which does not have those tubes, so we're gonna have to run lines specifically, but we do have these two plugs which plug into there. We're still looking to see what this white one does, but one step at a time. To give me something to mount these EGR valves to, I use that stud sticking out there. I made a bracket that will sit in here, and that flange will bolt to there, and that will hold it up such that the connectors are pointing sort of towards the top and the vacuum lines are pointing towards the top to route over to the other side of the engine. Okay, EGR is connected. We've got the two plugs going into the pair of valves there, and then we have vacuum lines. So the supply vacuum is running out of here, goes up, wraps around, goes into this vacuum tap port on top of the intake. And then the red, which is top, goes to the EGR valve. And so you follow along the tube, which I adapted from the old engine, and run it out to there. And there's a hose then coming out of the top tube and going down to the EGR valve. And then the middle one leaves here, runs all the way out there, and ends up being what goes into the side of the air filter, just like on the old engine setup. I still have this one plug, don't know where it goes, but I feel pretty good about the EGR and the V-Riz and the pressure, or the PRC, everything plugged in, so fingers crossed it won't get check engine lights.